What is the human microbiome and how is nutrition related to gut health? And what's the impact on our physical and mental well-being? These are some of the things we're discussing on today's podcast. Hi everyone, I'm Matt Eastland.
And I'm Lukxmi Balathasan, and this is the Food Fight podcast, exploring the greatest challenges facing the food system and the innovations and entrepreneurs looking to solve them. The Food Fight is brought to you by EIT Food, Europe's leading innovation community working hard to make the food system more healthy, sustainable, and trusted. If you haven't already, please follow the podcast and find out more about what we do at eitfood.eu.
And in today's episode, we're going to be exploring the link between the microbiome and happy guts and why that's important for our health. And for this conversation, we're joined first by Lisa Macfarlane, one of the CEO and founders of The Gut Stuff, which is the first e-commerce online shop for gut health in the UK. Thanks for joining us today, Lisa.
Thank you for having me. This is the best part of my day. It drags me out of the day-to-day of a startup, so it's brilliant.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Lisa. And we're also joined today by Anthony Finbow, the CEO of Eagle Genomics. Eagle Genomics is a startup that develops platform solutions addressing complex microbiome and genomics data for clients within the healthcare, personal care, and the agritech sectors. They're also one of EIT Food's rising food stars. So thanks so much for joining us today, Anthony.
Thanks, Lukxmi. Delighted to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation, and thanks so much, Matt, for giving me the chance to speak alongside Lisa, whom I've known for 4 years now. We're both pioneers in this space.
Before we kind of go through your backstories, which I know are really, really fascinating, can't wait, can you just sort of help us set the scene about what we're talking about? So what is the microbiome and why is it important? Lisa, maybe we can start with you.
So, you know, if you'd asked me 5 years ago what the microbiome was, I would have been like, what? But essentially, we have, you know, a number of pathogens, viruses, bacteria that live in, around and on us that we're just starting to learn how influential they are. The reason that we relate them mostly to gut health is because most of them are housed in our large intestine. They do everything. They're kind, they're smart, and they're important. And if you look after them, they'll look after you. So they do everything from, you know, regulating your blood sugar levels. They teach your immune system, who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. Literally, they do so much. They're far more clever than our human cells. Would you agree, Anthony? And I hate talking about the scientists, science in front of scientists. So that's like the layman terms version of the microbiome. But yeah, so they're just science is starting to discover just really how important it is.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think absolutely concur with Lisa. And, you know, in terms of the genomic content of the gut microbiome, it's extremely significant. We're perhaps, in terms of genes, 1% human, 99% bacterial. From an evolutionary perspective, we've co-evolved with these creatures so that they can augment what the human genome isn't able to produce. In the narrow sense, the microbiome is that bioreactor in your gut that transforms what you eat into what you need and tunes your immune system. In the broad sense, as far as I'm concerned, the microbiome is the lion's share of the biomass on Earth in every environment. As Lisa says, we're just starting to understand the importance of this, perhaps just before it's too late.
Thanks so much, Anthony, for giving us your views on that. So, you have a very interesting story about how you got into this microbiome space. We saw online that you got interested in the microbiome space after it helped you recover from a bad illness. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to become the CEO of Eagle Genomics.
You know, I did quite a number of things before I got to Eagle Genomics. I started life as an apprentice aircraft engineer, and then I worked for my first startup, a laser electro-optics company, before completely vectoring away, qualifying as a corporate lawyer, and then working in investment banking for about 5 years, privatizing, amongst other things, East German heavy industry, as the two Germanys came back together. You know, through that period, and indeed beyond, when I took my first role in a startup as a CEO in a company that was, in fact, listed at the peak of the internet boom, dual listed on the London Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ, let's just say that I was a bit stressed, and I ended up, you know, collapsing with an autoimmune challenge, autoimmune disease, which nearly killed me. I was told by doctors that my hemoglobin count in my blood was not compatible with life, so I was close to the edge. I had multiple blood transfusions, steroid therapy, and goodness knows what else, until I eventually, turned it around and made a full recovery. But whilst I was recovering, I picked up a copy of The Economist. This was 2005. I picked up a copy of The Economist in the hospital bed and read my first article about microbiome. got fascinated, started reading up on the literature. Didn't think too much about it until, quite a bit later, 2015, when I was asked to come to meet with the board at Eagle Genomics to talk about how we might, build the business together. At the time, the company was focused on DNA, human DNA primarily, trying to help biotech and pharma companies better understand human DNA. But we had one engagement with one company that was on microbiome, in fact, helping them understand oral microbiome at the time. And it just looked to me like that was the direction we should take the business in, away from what was a highly competitive space, looking at human microbiome, competing with a range of well-funded US venture-backed businesses, towards the microbiome, trying to help big companies interested in the microbiome space better understand their data. So, it was a bit fortuitous. It just stimulated me from a very early stage when I read that article, and when I found this opportunity at Eagle, and particularly this focus on microbiome, it just seemed like that was the most appropriate thing for us to focus on. And ever since then, we've been, I think, doing a great job in helping some major companies better understand their microbiome data.
Thanks very much for sharing your story, Anthony. It's very similar to a lot that we hear from other entrepreneurs that have been on the podcast, accidentally falling into this space.
And Lisa, I mean, I assume your story is not quite the same, but I know that it's also very, very interesting. So you're one of a twin, right? So you're part of the Mac Twin DJs originally. And I'm just really fascinated. How did you go from doing what you were doing before to moving into this space?
Yeah, I guess similar to Anthony, very randomly. But actually, in retrospect, I could probably preface the story by saying that I was actually meant to go to uni to do medicine, and my sister was meant to do business and law. So the world has come round in retrospect, but the journey there was random. So yeah, we were brought up in working class Scotland on a diet of deep fried pizza and chips and 10 Lambert and Butler for lunch. Science and wellness was definitely not something that we were used to, but we did have a curiosity for what was different between us as identical twins. And we were on a radio station called One Extra at the time, which is quite a young audience. And we were volunteering for Twin Research, which is the research facility under Tim Spector at King's. The reason we volunteered was essentially, firstly, they wanted younger sets of twins that were up for anything, which Alana and I very much were. And secondly, we had really different health pathways growing up. So Alana had juvenile chronic arthritis and I didn't, and they couldn't work out why because it wasn't hereditary. The American Gut Project had just happened. They knew that they wanted to start to look into twins and see if nutrition had an effect on the microbiome. We were the first set of twins to ever have that done. So essentially, long story short, we sent off stool samples every day for 2 months. For the first month, we were told to only drink alcohol and eat processed foods, which was fun for a week. And then it was not so fun doing that. Then they put us on a Mediterranean diet for the second month. Turns out, throughout the whole experiment, our gut bacteria was only around 30% the same at any one time. This meant two things. Firstly, that we could change it fairly drastically in the time that we had. And secondly, that if we as identical twins can't be sold the same diet and don't have the same microbiome, then everyone's basic, if we're strangers, then everyone's pretty unique. So yeah, and then I guess how it started the business, we set up the gutstuff.com purely because our friends were like, 1 minute you're on the Brits red carpet interviewing pop stars and the next minute you're at Reading University talking about probiotics. What is going on? And we were like, just that gut stuff, just that gut stuff. Accidentally, we were kind of filling a gap. At that point, the microbiome industry, the scientists weren't really, in different silos, weren't really speaking to each other. So immunologists weren't necessarily speaking to gastroenterologists, clinicians who definitely weren't speaking to the public. So we were essentially just putting all the information that we were learning and I guess asking scientists about lifestyle choices based on the science that was coming out, which was quite a strange concept at the time, really. The food industry was quite disparate at the time, so big strategics making things for a long time that people didn't necessarily know were good for their gut health, to small artisan fermenters making kimchi in their kitchen. And then the pharma industry was making all these incredible products that consumers didn't know about. So naturally, we were plugging all those gaps, and not just plugging the gaps from a communication perspective, but talking about it in a way that was quite pop culture and different. And now, yeah, we have a business with lots of staff and I'm trying to retire from DJing, so.
Anthony, so why do you think we should care about our gut health from an overall health and well-being perspective? Like, what is the data that you're seeing telling us?
Well, I think we're still super early in the journey. I think everyone in the industry will tell you that. And one of the problems we have with the microbiome, in contrast to human genomic DNA data, there are sparse data. There aren't enough data. You see a lot of companies spinning up in the space, particularly in the personal nutrition space, trying to capture data from a range of sources, gut microbiome test kits, in the same way as 23andMe, providing the kits for you to sample your oral human DNA. There are kits on the market to enable that, a similar kind of capture, but the data sets are small and it's very, very difficult. I think the primary advantage of that kind of approach is you get a lot of metadata. You get people who are taking the test, providing the samples, describing their challenges or whatever, and those data can be correlated in some way, shape or form alongside the microbiome genomic data. But we're trying to move ever more towards function, trying to understand what these microbes do. And that's a really challenging endeavor. You have what I would describe as the traditional sort of biopharma medical approach, which is to try and identify a particular marker or a particular microbe or a particular strain of microbe and correlate its presence or absence with a particular phenotype. That's a challenging approach. What I think is really fascinating is the analogy, which is attractive for me, which is that it is the song, not the singer. The song continues to be sung irrespective of who's singing it until it can no longer be sung anymore because we've dropped verses. By that I mean that there are a range of microbes, fungi, viruses, parasites, etc. in the gut. And I think one thing that is certain is that diversity in the gut correlates with health. Lack of diversity in some way correlates with disease. But if you take out certain microbes and they are substituted. The metabolism across the chain, if you like, is maintained through substitution. That makes it incredibly difficult to understand what's actually going on there. And then you think about the ecology effect, the overall effect of the ecology on the host, the human host, or the root of a plant, or whatever. It's an extremely challenging domain. And so trying to capture the data is a major challenge. Trying to create a robust data fabric so that you can explore those data is a major challenge. And then providing the mechanisms to link the understanding of the individual microbe in an ecology and the ecology on the host is a major challenge. So I think we're at the dawn of a new era in trying to understand that. We talk about networking microbiome science. By that we mean understanding the impact of an individual microbe in a network, but also networking this domain of science into our models of disease and wellness, because without it, they're missing a major component, if not wrong.
And Anthony, it's interesting you'd say about this is like the dawn of a new era. It seems to me that over about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, everyone was like, oh, Yakult, Activia, everybody knows about that. But it seems like very recently, or certainly to us, that the phrase microbiome is now on almost everybody's lips. Everybody's talking about the microbiome. It's exploded as a term. So why has this become so trendy and important now? I mean, Lisa, maybe given what you do, maybe you can talk us through it.
It's a culmination of a lot of things. So it's people creating products within the space because they know that the trend's coming. It is people looking for answers because the current models and systems don't work. I think as well, like one of the main things that I will say is the confusion lies with consumers, I think, digestive health and gut health. And I think people don't really understand. That's why it's linked with so many other clinical issues, IBS, Crohn's, and it gets a bit murky. And I think that when it starts to be commercialized into food products, it's easier for people to pick that bit apart. So I think that's why and I guess we always say like fermenting didn't start in East London, despite popular belief. And I think actually the reason it's a cumulative effect of people kind of knowing what that stuff is about and then hearing about it in places they wouldn't expect. And the distinction between gut health and digestive health is starting to be teased apart, sort of. And also how we share information is a lot more quick. And a lot of brands are now recognising and realising that they have to educate the consumers alongside trying to sell those products. So I would say that's Anthony might have a different view because he's got more of like a B2B perspective on it. But I think, we are very much direct to consumer. And also, like, we've definitely seen, so we did the first study 5 years ago. And, you know, as a startup, when stuff is falling out of the sky, you know you're in a new place of growth. We knew quite quickly that we had a business on our hands, which is an unusual place to be in. Yes, we were shoveling stuff up the hill day to day, trying to get people to understand. But, you know, we have food products now in grocery and in mainstream areas. We were on Sky News last week. You know, it's getting
Amazing.
mainstream quickly, but we have to do it in a way that isn't sensationalized. It's really important that we teach people that this is very, very new, and having a bit of sauerkraut ain't going to cure your depression, etc., despite what other news outlets will tell you. And I think that actually we need to pull back some of the awareness, because people still have a binary relationship with food. So good food, bad foods, alcohol, no alcohol, and teaching them about the nuance of the grey areas of the science and where we're at is difficult. And I think we need to step back to do that.
Incredible.
So same question to you, Anthony. You mentioned in your earlier story that when you came on board at Eagle Genomics, the company was particularly focusing on human genomics rather than the microbiome, and you were instrumental in spearheading that transition. But when you started, were your clients already interested in the gut health microbiome space, or is this something that you had really pushed for?
No, I mean, I think you know, as an entrepreneur, the thing is, you can't find yourself in a position where you're market making, because that's not an investable proposition. You just have to wait for the market to evolve, or you have to find the pocket of activity in the market that's attractive. And the microbiome enabled us to vector towards personal care, cosmetics, food and agri-bio businesses, away from biotech and pharma in the short term. But, you know, when we're talking to food businesses, we're talking to food companies that are looking at alternatives to traditional proteins, plant-based, microbial-derived proteins, and then eventually cellular meats. And they're all, you know, trying to compete to transform the industry and looking at gut health as a basis to potentially supplant the alternatives there. But I think what Alana and Lisa have been doing to raise the awareness is inspirational stuff. But I think it's just pushing against the open door, which is the zeitgeist, which is that people are starting to recognize that we are a holobiont. We are an organism in an ecology. It can't come soon enough as far as I'm concerned, because you know, when we think about microbiome, as I said, it's beyond the gut, it's beyond the skin, the scalp, it's the soil. And I don't know if you've seen the film, which is raising tremendous awareness, Kiss the Ground. But you know, when we think about the climate challenge, people talk about planting trees to try and remove carbon from the atmosphere. But the trees effectively are the conduits that remove the carbon dioxide and transfer the carbon into the microbes, which fix the carbon in the soil, unless we till the soil or unless we fertilize the soil such that we decimate the soil microbiome. And when we think about alternative proteins, the industry is going to be built on the back of precision fermented microbiome-derived proteins. And McKinsey and Company, Boston Consulting Group, Henderson Institute, they talk about the microbe as the unit of currency for the biorevolution. And so understanding microbes is a frontier in so many respects. I've read a report recently from a group called Rethink X, which is truly out there. But they are talking about the second domestication. The first domestication hundreds of thousands of years ago, when we evolved to an agrarian society, cultivating plants, you know, herding animals for food. The second domestication is domesticating the microbe so that the microbe can be put to work to generate the products of tomorrow. And not just the food products, the alternatives to plastic. We're seeing IPO after IPO after IPO trying to harness the power of the microbe towards a new business endeavor. But what I love about this is it's towards a more sustainable future, not sustainability, if you like, as a gloss on the business, but as the business, because as both McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group say, this is going to liberate tens of trillions of dollars of economic value over the next 10 to 20 years.
And I guess I can to add to that on a very grassroots level, we do a lot of talks in schools and universities. And when we talk about gut health, the penny starts to drop when people realise that actually farm to plate, not having sterilised cubed vegetables that you have in your thing, like fermented foods, all of these things benefit one another. As Anthony says, that tidal wave and shift change will happen quickly when it comes, because actually it's a solution for not just health, it's a solution for a lot of other things, and it's difficult to sleep at night when you know you're on the precipice of something like this, and it doesn't make for a great dinner table conversation when you talk to your friends all the time about it. But if I wanted an easy life, I would have stayed in the music industry. The thing that really kind of kept propelling Alana and I towards this was how our minds continued to be blown every day when we learned something new. And, we've recently just got B Corp pending as well. And actually, when it comes to social impact, and thank you, it's a very long process, but it's worth it. I think as a small business, we're at the stage where we can start to make decisions that based on social impact alongside having a commercial business, and that was important to us. But yeah, I've realised going through that process how linked it all is and how much each part of it benefits each other, really.
That's really fascinating. Actually, something we're talking about more and more EIT food, particularly with a focus on regenerative agriculture, and it's very much about that kind of soil microbiome and how everything's kind of connected, and that piece around sustainability, which is incredible. I mean, just to talk about or focus in on the health aspect a little bit, can one of you talk us through, what affects our microbiome? I'm assuming diet has a big role to play, but Anthony, based on your kind of stress experience, I'm also assuming that it goes way beyond that. So what are the things we need to be looking out for in terms of making sure that we have good health and therefore, a good gut health?
Well, I'd say, of course, trying to understand food as a stimulus or a perturbation on the microbiome, and then the impact of dysbiosis or eubiosis, healthy microbiome on health. Trying to understand the causal links is the major challenge there. But, we're breaking through slowly. One of our investors, Laszlo Barabashi, who's a sort of leading thinker on network science, he talks about the foodome. We know just as little about the molecular and chemical constituents of our foods as we know about the gut microbiome itself. And we see this now plethora of startups emerging, looking at micronutrients. And that's great, but how do we understand whether those micronutrients are indeed nutrients and how they're going to improve our health? So I think we've got to understand more about the constituents of our food, more about how food over short and long-term period transforms the microbiome and how the microbiome itself interacts with the host. So that's the frontier, and that's driving the art and the science in so many ways. But of course, the other major point, which is, how I came to this, is the damage done by antibiotics. We see the acknowledgement of the, antibiotic resistance challenge, and we focus our attention on not administering as many antibiotics, doctors being told not to administer as many antibiotics. And then we look upstream with our narrow focus towards the animals and say we should stop using antibiotics in rearing animals. But we are flushing all sorts of antibiotics down into the sewer systems, and the resistant microbes are growing there, and the resistant microbes are growing in the soil. And if we keep using, fertilizers that decimate or damage soils, we're encouraging the microbes that can resist in the soil as well. So I think we've got to look at all these challenges as interlinked once again. We are trying to work at that frontier, providing large businesses with the infrastructure, using network science to understand the interactions between the foods, the microbiome, and the host. And I think the industry is accelerating, as Lisa says.
Thanks, Anthony. And Lisa, when people come to you, and sadly, as it turns out, often in the toilets, when they're asking you about this space and they kind of want to know where they should start, what are the first things that you want to be saying to people about, the things which affect your gut health?
Yeah, so I guess they can be quite neatly bucketed into things that aren't within your control and the things that are within your control. And I guess the things that are out with your control, how you were born, where you breastfed, was it cesarean birth? I was an 80s baby, over-sanitized. Obviously now, antibiotics use, as Anthony touched upon, over-sanitization, sedentary lifestyles, not being outside in nature. When we actually wrote the first book, my mum always goes, why is everyone talking about this now? Stop being so preachy. And I think that context piece is really important of why we're talking about it now and what we can control. So that's all the stuff that's kind of out with our control. Can we change it now? Yes. kiss dogs, get out in nature, lick the floor, as Anthony said. But also thinking about the other things that can affect it, to your point before, so the lifestyle changes, sleep. Your gut bugs have a circadian rhythm like you do, really important, the gut-brain axis, historically, we thought that was a one-way system. So there's something called the vagus nerve. Unfortunately, nothing to do with Las Vegas, which is a physical connection between your gut and brain. We thought before that was a one-way system. We now know that actually there's more pathways going up than there are coming down. Neurotransmitters are it's like the phone line is basically the vagus nerve, and the neurotransmitters are like the WhatsApp, constantly talking to your your brain. They speak to each other all the time, and I think that link, if you saw the person that you fancy, you get butterflies in your stomach, etc. We knew that there was a link there, but now we know that it's two-way. It's really important, and actually just knowing that empowers a lot of people to know that nutrition and potentially that link could be a tool in their armory. It's not a solution, but it could be a tool in the armory. And then secondly, the main thing that you have within your control is to tune into your own body. None of us really do that until you get to the point that Anthony did, or unless you're hungover. And I think that nobody does that, and we always say that's the first place to start, and empower yourself with the knowledge, because I think, even biologically, people are like, do you mean my stomach? And you're like, sort of, but there's a lot of other stuff involved as well. So knowing some of those links can empower you to start to make better decisions for your health, and also knowing that it's not just about what you eat, it's how you eat and all the other aspects. So, mindful eating, chewing your foods, all these other things that are within our control, are accessible and are affordable. Unfortunately, it is not a magic pill that has come from a lab. It is all this boring stuff like fibre, tuning into your body, getting a good night's sleep. Like, it's not particularly sexy or innovative just yet in terms of what we can say to people. In the future, I would love to have toilets that give you a poo reading and there'd be a personalised probiotics, etc. But for now, it's basically going back to what your grandparents told you.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. You talked about the balance and all the things that can impact gut health, and that there's clearly no magic bullet, but, there are clearly some products out there that claim to be, and, it'd be really great to sort of unpick that with you. So to start off with, there are sort of two key products that we hear about all the time: probiotics, prebiotics. It'd be great to hear from your opinion what those words mean. So let's start with prebiotics.
So Anthony will probably give you a really scientific version of this, but it's essentially the food for the bacteria that's already in there. I think it's an easier concept for consumers to grasp, because people are like, oh yeah, probiotics, they don't, do they survive the stomach acid? Like, there's so many variables with probiotics. And I think prebiotics are simpler. We can get them through food as well as supplementation if that's what you want to go for. The problem that we have in the UK specifically with prebiotics and probiotics is that you are not allowed to say it on pack, and you're absolutely not allowed to say any health benefits that they could potentially come with them, which is great because, that should be the case. They should be regulated, but it does leave consumers a bit confused as to how and why, even if you can't say it on pack, it makes it very difficult. We've launched a fibre bar food product. We wanted to go into snacking because it was, well, from a business perspective, a white space in the market. But from our perspective was that people still struggle with functional foods because they want it to have an effect immediately rather than being a swap or a choice. And that's something that we really, really want to change within the food industry. It shouldn't be a solution. It should be potentially a better option. And it should be the same price as confectionery and shouldn't be at a premium in health food, hidden in health food stores. So that was something that was really important to us. And I guess the probiotics thing as well is, I would just urge people to ask themselves why they're taking a probiotic. So, and people look at 1 billion, trillion, squillion cultures, which means nothing to Joe Blogs. And actually it's about the strains of bacteria. So are you taking it for traveller's diarrhea? Great, because there's a lot of studies to suggest that that's a good idea. And I think that, we always say to people, go on to PubMed, it's for a rainy day, but type in the strain and you'll see which bacteria have been through which clinical trials. And I think that is an effort and a big ask for consumers, but something that's really important because it gets you out of the headspace of a solution and into of, oh, right, okay, it's about strains. Do I need that strain? Why am I taking a probiotic? Rather than the relationship that we all have with supplementation, where a lot of it is expensive and an excuse for not adding on if you've not been making good lifestyle choices. And I think actually peeling it back and going, let's look at the basics first and then look at all that stuff second. But yeah, sorry, that was very long-winded. It's food for the good bacteria.
Yeah, Lisa, can I just ask, so we constantly hear like everyone's always saying prebiotics and probiotics. What's the difference? What should people actually be caring about between the two?
Both. So if you think of it as the probiotics are the party goers, so you want lots of different types of them at the party, and the prebiotic is the buffet. So you want people to drink and have a good time at the party. So yeah, you need them both.
Your science comm skills are spot on, I must say. It's
amazing. These are all of the things that I'm now going to remember forever.
And Anthony, from your perspective, you have clients working in the healthcare space, so prebiotics and probiotic space must be quite important. How are your clients taking a scientific approach to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're all focused on the same goal, which is how do you prove that a particular food is healthy, right?
Yeah.
And, there is the stratification, as Lisa says, pre, pro, and postbiotics. And Lisa mentioned, people are concerned about probiotics, the microbes themselves, because, if you introduce cocktails of these or consortia, do they survive the journey to the gut? And of course, we have to think about, the tube, by the way, as having niche microbiome at a number of stages on the path. But the question is, how do you define these criteria, these categories, and how do you determine whether they can deliver a benefit? And indeed, if it's a therapeutic benefit, then it has to stand the test of a therapeutic claims process. So the customers, the major enterprises, and all the food companies are trying to understand how to deliver a microbiome-based product claim. So what we're trying to do is provide this evidential basis to take the customers we're working with along the scientific journey from exploratory analysis, hypothesis elicitation, trying to create hypotheses which can actually cut muster. So one of the challenges with the kind of scientific method is a focus on, the double-blind, placebo-controlled study as a basis to generate a result. Well, that's great because it proves that you're doing robust science. It tells you nothing about the impact for an individual. So there is an evolution away from evidence-based science or evidence-based medicine towards medicine-based evidence, because we have the data structures now to take the individual, to understand how an individual is responding to a particular food or drug or therapeutic or whatever, and factor that in using robust data management structures to try and elicit signals. And when we think about microbiome, the traditional approach presents a real challenge, because isolating microbes, developing hypotheses to generate results without taking into account the ecology effect doesn't yield results that are interesting. So this is a major challenge. Now we're seeing in fact, last summer, the European Food Standards Authority issued calls for people to help them to understand how to evaluate microbiome-based product claims. And we're seeing increasingly a lot of focus on bioactive ingredients or postbiotics as therapeutic mechanisms, and the standards and the regulations are evolving super quickly. So what we're trying to do is enable that scientific journey, but also match to the evolving regulatory environment so that we really can enable delivery of robust scientific claims associated with these various foods.
So do you think that the data and the robustness is going to lead to a place where everything's provable, and we're not talking about fads, particularly with microbiome, because I'm sure there are lots of people out there talking about lots of different things. Some of it will be pseudoscience and some of it, people have no idea. So do you think that the data will prevent people sort of moving down a bad road, I guess, when it comes to this space?
It absolutely must, Matt. I'm skeptical about the ability in the short to medium term for us to build the model from the genome through multi-omics up to try and understand, impact. But that's why we're applying a different approach, network science, to try and create understanding of correlations and then causal analysis to try and elicit signals that are reliable across a range of data types. What's interesting is now we are starting to see biotech and pharma companies also focus on the microbiome. And if we take the most interesting area currently, people are looking at cancer interventions, immuno-oncology interventions, and recognizing that dysbiosis, damage to the gut microbiome impacts efficacy of these treatments. So I think we are starting to see the networking of the microbiome dimension back into our systems biology models. And I think that's a journey that's not going to stop. It's only going to accelerate.
I think as well, to add to that, like, cowboys are always going to come into town for sure as categories start to widen. And I think that the only way that we can kind of tackle that is to educate consumers. And that is very difficult from a wellbeing perspective. As Anthony touched upon, from a healthcare perspective, it's like, these are the studies that are coming out. This is the area of research. But from a wellbeing perspective, teaching consumers about the hierarchy of evidence. So here's a lot of trials that have been done on this particular thing, sliding scale down to the very bottom of, anecdotally, someone said it made them feel a bit better. And I think that that's the bit of work that has to be done. And yes, we can do it from a regs perspective. Yes, the science will accelerate quickly. That's brilliant. But the only way that we can tackle and avoid the nonsense and the other claims is to teach consumers to spot the nonsense for themselves, because then there won't be a market for it.
So, we talked about fads, and Lisa, you mentioned your twin is growing a human being currently. And one of the things that I came across when I was speaking to my midwife as the importance of the mother's microbiome and the impact it has on child's health. And since birth, your microbiome is impacted by your mom's microbiome. So is this a fad, or is there some science behind this?
What I'd say is the science is out. What is interesting is that there are, suggestions that, passage from the womb, which is no longer classified as a sterile environment, through the vagina, provides the kind of seeding microbiome for the gut. But it's really interesting. There are companies out there like Evolve Bioscience who believe that actually it's migration of a particular bacterium, Bifidobacter infantis, I think it's called, from the anus. That is the initial seeding mechanism for the gut that translates the mother's milk oligosaccharides in the early stages to, start the right kind of evolution of a gut microbiome. But you can see from that you have camps, suggesting vaginal microbiome or fecal microbiome. What is it? I think we are still in the early stages of really understanding that.
And this is so fascinating. And, the first time I've even heard about microbiomes was from a scientific article published about fecal microbe transplant. Is this something that's working clinically?
7,000 years ago, the Chinese were using yellow soup to remedy a range of illnesses and having results. I think you've seen studies to suggest that fecal microbiome transplant is incredibly efficacious in comparison with a range of other medicines, but there are all sorts of dangerous challenges with that. There are suggestions using mice models that you might be able to remediate a health challenge, but at the same time, trigger some non-communicable inflammatory reaction, or, in fact, make mice obese on the basis of fecal microbiome transplant. But I think there are a lot of businesses focusing on that. Microbiotica in Cambridge was originally focused on, and amongst other things, is still focused on trying to create the alternative to the fecal microbiome transplant by providing the pill that achieves the same result. But I think it's irrefutable that in some way, shape, or form, augmenting or supplanting or reconstituting the microbiome using elements that are missing has an impact.
And like we've talked about in so many areas of this, yes, there is really promising studies and results for things like C. diff, which is great, but when people start to take that tiny bit of science and, you can go and pay to have fecal transplant, which is, ethically wild. And, people are always going to take a bit of science and try and apply it commercially to something and do it. And I think that people don't want to hear, particularly the media, that it has worked in some cases in C. diff. They want to hear, look at this new thing, it's quite funny, and you can do it too, and it'll have X, Y, and Z. And, it's like colonics have the same thing. But yeah, stuff like that is what we get asked about a lot. And people all almost try and, glamorize all of these things as the next wellness fad. And it's, it can be quite scary how quickly people can take it on.
So the jury's still out about these two topics and whether there's some truth to it. I guess at the end of the day, like you said before, there really is no quick fix. And I guess it's all about balance, right? Healthy diet, sleep, limit your alcohol, just keeping your gut as happy as possible.
And can we go from sort of fads to the future then? So, I mean, what's the next big thing, do you think, in this space? And whether that's in your own companies or sort of outside in the rest of the world, what's something that really excites you, which is coming up next? What about you, Lisa?
We actually had an amazing young scientist called Rory Robertson at the end of the first book is his kind of stargazing to the future. And I was like, go as wild as you want, pal. So yeah, as I said before, like the toilets, the personalised probiotics, innovation, brilliant, super exciting. My bedtime reading used to be Nancy Mitford novels. It is now the future of the science of the microbiome. But I guess, from a company perspective, we want to make gut health as habitual as brushing your teeth. And that's the thing that excites us most, that people will stop talking about it. And that seems counterintuitive, but it will be so, intrinsic into our lives, and we will have these gut bugs at the forefront of our minds at all times, and people will naturally, habitually consider them, take products, eat food based on that, and they will know instinctively about their microbiome. And I think that's the thing that excites us most at the gut stuff, because we've started to see the wave crest onto the beach. It's been amazing to watch, and it's only going to go further. And and that's not like a really, I've seen the way people's lives can be changed. Knowing about gut health, it's not that at all. It's more basic than that. And yeah, as I kind of touched upon before, democratizing all of that is the thing that gets us up in the morning.
So what I'm excited about is the phase shift that's coming. We are approaching the end of the digital economy. I'm not saying digital economy is disappearing, but we're seeing the beginning of digital applied to every other type of economy. And we are seeing a phase shift. People talk about the fourth industrial revolution and Hello Tomorrow, and we're a Hello Tomorrow deep tech 500 global company. Talk about this nature co-design, fourth industrial revolution being bio-led industrial revolution. And I think that is coming. The integration of understanding of microbes and microbiome into so many domains, soil health, agriculture, food production, gut health, etc. It has inordinate transformational potential. And I think it also is encouraging us to possibly even rethink our models of disease and wellness, but also rethink our fundamental assumptions about what life is, and whether it's a distributed system or whether we're individual entities. All of that's great, I think, and I think it's necessary, because we've got to move away from the extractive, destructive practices of the previous industrial revolution towards a better economic paradigm, exploiting nature co-design. And that's the thing that, having an impact, working with these large enterprises that are, if you like, at the juncture, looking upstream at making sure that we are trying to focus on biodiversity in the soil, thinking about biodiversity from the microbe up, to preserve the soils, because unless we do that, we only have maybe 60 harvests left in the soil, towards no longer just focusing on delivering calorific content to humans, irrespective of whether that's healthy or not, towards focusing on the health benefits of food. These enterprises have such a significant stakeholder role in transforming the way we live as a society. I think the opportunity to be involved in helping them shift is super interesting for me.
Incredible. Wow. Very, very wise words, Anthony. Thank you so much for that. It seems like a very nice place to start wrapping up the episode as well. So thank you. It's been a real pleasure chatting to both of you today. I knew this was going to be a fascinating episode. I'd love to stay on and talk for hours and hours more and more about this. Just before we kind of officially close, then, what would be your key takeaways that you'd want everybody who's listening to this podcast to know about the microbiome? Lisa, what about you?
I guess it's unique to you, even if you're a twin. It's really important, and
nice.
You can change it. It's within your control.
And what about you, Anthony?
I don't know. I can match or better Lisa. What I would say is just remember the term, because I think it happens to everyone. The microbiome is invisible to everyone until they hear the term and hear the definition, and then they see it everywhere. So just keep it in mind is what I'd say.
And Lisa, finally, so where can listeners go for more information about you and the gut stuff?
Very easy. It's just thegutstuff.com. Or Instagram is probably like our most active platform. And yeah, we wrote a book with 18 of scientists and experts, which is just like a really kind of simplified version of the science from lots of different areas. So it's quite a good starting point because it comes from a lot of different viewpoints. So yeah, if you have a rainy day.
Amazing.
And what about you, Anthony? So where can listeners go to find out more about either yourself or get in touch with you or Eagle Genomics?
Yeah, so www.eaglegenomics.com or anthony.finbow@eaglegenomics.com.
Perfect. Yeah, simple enough.
A fascinating discussion, and it's been really amazing to talk about this. It's such a complex area, but I think we've really helped to kind of clarify a lot around this. So just wanted to say big thanks to you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Had to get back to actual work now. I've tried too much while I do this.
To real life. And thanks also to you, Anthony.
Matt, Lukxmi, Lisa, thank you very much. It was such fun. Great fun talking to you.
Great stuff. Thank you. So, everybody, this has been the Food Fight podcast. As ever, if you'd like to find out more, head over to the EIT Food website at www.eitfood.eu and join the conversation via hashtag EITFoodFight on our Twitter channel at EITFood. And if you haven't already, please hit the follow button so you never miss an episode. That's it for now. Thanks, everybody, for listening.